Hello folks, Brother Jim reporting here at End Times Prophecy News. The UN warns Assange could face death penalty if extradited to the US. It determines that he has been exposed to psychological torture. Is that true? Or is that the global elites trying to paint him as sick in the brain? The mind, the head of the best true news exposing corruption in the world is sick? The United Nations has issued a scathing press release insisting that the collective persecution of Julian Assange must end here and now. That sounds good. Nils Melzer, the UN Special Reporter on Torture, said that Assange has been exposed to psychological torture and warns that the award-winning publisher could face the death penalty if he is extradited to the United States. That's not going to happen. I don't believe that would happen with Trump. But anyway, Meltzer visited Assange along with two medical experts who specialize in examining potential torture victims on May 9th. So right away, I'm thinking, okay, so in other words, they're trying to paint him as sick and that he's going to receive the death penalty in the United States, so don't extradite him because we're going to torture him more here. We're going to make sure he's in prison here. We want to make sure that the U.S. doesn't get a hold of it because Donald Trump might want to pardon him. Could that be the truth? Just throwing that out there. Quote, my most urgent concern is that in the United States, Mr. Assange would be exposed to a real risk of serious violations of his human rights, including his freedom of expression, his right to a fair trial, and the prohibition of torture and other cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. With Donald Trump as president, we do have a lot of corrupt judges. I beg to differ on that one. Quote, I am particularly alarmed at the recent announcement by the U.S. Department of Justice of 17 new charges against Mr. Assange under the Espionage Act, which currently carry up to 175 years in prison. True, the Democrats want him bad because they blame him for losing the election, even though it was God who brought Cyrus into action. This may well result in a life sentence without parole or possibly even the death penalty if further charges were to be added in the future, Meltzer continued. Meltzer also said that he is gravely concerned about the restrictions on lawyer visits and Assange's lack of access to case files in Belmarsh prison, where he is currently being held. He said that the conditions make it impossible for him to adequately prepare his defense against the complex legal proceedings that are stacking up. On Thursday, Assange was too ill to appear for a hearing even by video link. He has been moved to the prison's medical unit and cannot even hold a normal conversation with his lawyers. What is he getting in the prison's medical unit? Is it good attention? I don't know. Quote, you got to question all these things. Quote, since 2010, when WikiLeaks started publishing evidence of war crimes and torture committed by U.S. forces, we have seen a sustained and concerted effort by several states towards getting Mr. Assange extradited to the United States for prosecution, raising serious concerns over the criminalization of investigative journalism in violation of both the U.S. Constitution and international human rights law, Meltzer said. The UN cares about Julian Assange? But the UN is at war with Trump, the globalists against Trump. There's actually people in America that believe that Trump is a globalist. Meltzer wrote that there has been a relentless and unrestrained campaign of public mobbing, intimidation, and defamation against Mr. Assange, not only in the United States, but also in the United Kingdom, Sweden, and more recently, Ecuador. The UN statement said that this included an endless stream of humiliating, debasing, and threatening statements in the press and on social media. I agree with all this. But also by senior political figures and even by judicial magistrates involved in proceedings against Assange. Quote, in the course of the past 9 years, Mr. Assange has been exposed to persistent, progressively severe abuse ranging from systematic judicial persecution and arbitrary confinement in the Ecuadorian embassy to his oppressive isolation, harassment, and surveillance inside the embassy, and from deliberate collective ridicule, insults, and humiliation to open instigation of violence and even repeated calls for his assassination. I agree with all this. Here, in this paragraph, speaking about the visit that he and the medical professionals had with Assange earlier this month, Meltzer said that it was obvious that his health has been seriously impacted by the extremely hostile and arbitrary environment he has been exposed to for many years. Most importantly, in addition, but we do know it is the deep state, the globalists, who are doing all this, orchestrating this. And many people are trying to say that it's the United States government doing it alone. Well, partly because the deep state in America is there, but it's in all the governments. Not all, but most of them. Most importantly, in addition to physical ailments, Mr. Assange showed all symptoms typical for prolonged exposure to psychological torture, including extreme stress, chronic anxiety, and intense psychological trauma, the UN report said. The evidence is overwhelming and clear. The findings continued. Mr. Assange has been deliberately exposed for a period of several years to progressively severe forms of cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment, the cumulative effects of which can only be described as psychological torture. Meltzer has sent official letters to the 4 governments involved in the campaign against Assange, urging them to refrain from further disseminating, instigating, or tolerating statements or other activities prejudicial to Assange's human rights and dignity, and to take measures to provide him with appropriate redress and rehabilitation for past harm. He also urged that the United Kingdom not to send the 2019 Nobel Peace Prize nominee to the United States or to any other nation which may decide to extradite him here. I condemn in the strongest terms the deliberate and concerted and sustained nature of the abuse inflicted on Mr. Assange, and seriously deplore the consistent failure of all involved governments to take measures for the protection of his most fundamental human rights and dignity, the expert said, by displaying an attitude of complacency at best and of complicity at worst. These governments have created an atmosphere of impunity, encouraging Mr. Assange's uninhibited vilification and abuse. This is a good thing, generally speaking, because someone's in defense from the UN for him. The report concluded with a strong condemnation of the actions of these governments in working to deliberately abuse him. In 20 years of work with victims of war, violence, and political persecution, I have never seen a group of democratic states ganging up to deliberately isolate, demonize, and abuse a single individual for such a long time and with so little regard for human dignity and the rule of law, Meltzer said. Interesting that he says democratic states or nations. That's what he means by states. But democratic. The collective persecution of Julian Assange must end here and now. In 2016, after 16 months of investigation, the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention concluded that Assange is the victim of arbitrary detention. Not only did the group of lawyers and human rights professionals release an opinion that Assange should be released, they also determined that he should be compensated by the governments of Sweden and the United Kingdom for deprivation of liberty. Prior to the release of the UN report, the publisher's mother, Christine Assange, tweeted that the UK government is unlawfully slowly killing my son. They made him very ill by refusing him any access to life-sustaining fresh air, exercise, sun, vitamin D. And vitamin D kills cancer, folks. Or it prevents cancer, doesn't kill it, but... or proper medical care for 6 years of illegal embassy detention, she tweeted at the United Nations Twitter account on Wednesday. Then, against all medical advice, threw him into a prison cell. Assange is currently, you can read the rest of her tweet there. Assange is currently imprisoned at Belmarsh Prison in the United Kingdom and facing 18 charges under the Espionage Act in the United States for his publication of the Iraq and Afghan war logs. If extradited and convicted, he could be sentenced for up to 175 years in prison. Chelsea Manning is currently back in prison for refusing to comply with another grand jury against the publisher, meaning that the U.S. is still seeking to add additional charges. Well, for one thing, this is a number one threat against free speech and the First Amendment. And I will just say a moment here that the world wants to take away your free speech, and they're doing it by phrases such as political PC correct or politically correct. They're doing it phrases and ideologies of the words. What else is there? Hate speech, politically correct. And this hate speech thing is all speech is supposed to be freedom of speech, right? But you see, the hate speech is only targeted at those who hate what the left stand for, which is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, bestiality, pedophilia. Yes, they're trying to legalize pedophilia in California. And every abomination under the sun. That's right. That's what they're trying to do, including sacrificing babies onto Baal, which is Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood. Where have we gone for parenthood? Let's see. The woman's on top, the man's on the bottom now. The man is not the spiritual advisor anymore. The woman's the spiritual advisor. The woman is mainly the preacher in churches nowadays. Joyce, liar. Everything's upside down. And now, soon, Satan will manifest in the flesh after the Antichrist rules for the first 3.5 years. But Jesus will come to wipe it all away. Thank you for listening. Let me be serious with you. I would rather that you donate to my ministry directly. I cannot survive financially to keep this ministry and news service going without your help. And we all know their plans to shut me down again. But many of you would like to receive a gift or product as a token of my appreciation. And I don't blame you. Isn't it about time Uncle Sam started paying you instead of you paying him? It is about time. The federal government pays you your rent check. The government rents out thousands of buildings instead of buying them every year. This is all funded by the current $11.1 billion building fund in our budget. Get your free federal rent check today. Sign up with the Federal Millionaire information here down below. Become a shareholder to receive federal rent checks for life by making a one-time investment as a shareholder. An IRS ruling declares this to be totally legal. This is no joke, no scam, and been for many years. The longer your name is on the distribution list, the larger your federal rent check grows. As inflation rises along with real estate, the government pays you more every year. Starting out as little as $1,800 a month would be your rent check. Wouldn't that be nice to receive every month a rent check like that? The federal government continues to raise your income as inflation rises. This puts an end to retiring with a fixed income that leaves you going broke as you get older. This will put a major dent in those people who hate their home taxes going up every year, wouldn't it? And folks, the price for this valuable information will cost you only $39 a year or $79 for a 2-year membership. Sign up today.